In Taiwan, a pay bump for the country's armed forces as the military struggles with recruitment.
在不是服，也就是不愿意继续担任最重要、最高的比例，薪水是里面的重中之重。
The American Chamber of Commerce in Taiwan calls for the return of visits by senior U.S. officials.
High-level exchanges were routine before the pandemic. It's time to reestablish that protocol.
Plus, escalation on the streets of LA as Trump doubles National Guard troops and sends in Marines to counter immigration protests.
If I didn't get involved, if we didn't bring the Guard in, and we would bring more in if we needed it, because we have to make sure there's going to be law and order.
Warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Liao. Leading off with our top story, in the face of growing threats from China, Taiwan's opposition-held legislature has passed a bill that increases pay for the country's volunteer armed forces. Taiwan's volunteer military personnel are getting a pay bump. Lawmakers have passed an amendment boosting their monthly allowance to $1,000 US. The increase is expected to take effect next year. At a time when Taiwan's military is being tested by China, which sends warplanes and naval vessels close to the country on a near-daily basis, both ruling and opposition lawmakers seem to agree that Taiwan's defenders deserve more.
我们都认同国军弟兄24小时保家卫国，待遇应该合理适度的调升。
人才守得住，国防才守得住。
The pay increase comes amid high turnover and low recruitment among Taiwan's ranks. Lawmakers say that the new law is meant to address these issues.
因为过去这几年可以清楚地看得出来，在不是服，也就是不愿意继续担任最重要、最高的比例，薪水是里面的重中之重。
But the amendment's passage was not without controversy. Taiwan's main opposition Kuomintang holds the legislature along with the smaller Taiwan People's Party. And together, the two parties' lawmakers can steamroll their ruling party counterparts in the chamber. But the bill sparked an unusual dispute between the KMT and the TPP on whether the pay raise should be the same across all ranks. The ruling Democratic Progressive Party also clashed with the opposition over the raises, not on content, but on procedure. Even though the legislature controls the country's budget, Premier Zhuo Rongtai says that when it comes to proposals that would vastly increase government spending, the legislature would need to consult his cabinet first, something he said opposition lawmakers have not done.
预算法91条明文的写到，立法院用法律案大幅增加中央政府税出的时候，一定要跟行政院来征询，行政院绝对依照宪政的精神提出救济。
While there's broad consensus that Taiwan's armed forces deserve higher pay, opinions differ on how raises should be implemented and how much should be offered. The debate isn't limited to the two main ruling and opposition parties. Each of the legislature's three major players bring their own perspectives to the table. John Su and Leslie Liao for TaiwanPlus. The American Chamber of Commerce in Taiwan has released its latest white paper, urging action on tariffs, security cooperation, and more political interaction. Reporter Chris Gorin was at the release of the white paper in Taipei and spoke with the Chamber's new president about what companies want from both governments.
American and Taiwanese businesses want stronger economic, political, and defense ties between Taiwan and the United States. That's according to a new white paper from the American Chamber of Commerce in Taiwan, which represents several of those companies. They're calling for a reduction in U.S. tariffs on Taiwan and the elimination of double taxation in the two countries. They're also calling for bolstered defense support for Taiwan in the face of what they call Chinese military expansion. And they want more cabinet-level U.S. officials to visit Taiwan, as well as support for Taiwan's participation in international organizations. This is the first white paper released under the new AmCham president, Carl Wegner. I spoke with him about some of the Chamber's new priorities. So the Chamber has called for a reduction in tariffs on Taiwanese products. How do you think that U.S. tariffs on Taiwanese products harm American interests?
I think our position on the white paper is not directly on that. It's a position per industry, right? We have 500 companies, 25 committees, and they've all come with slightly different comments on what could be doing to help their industry. Tariffs in general are one way of negotiating between countries. I think from the AmCham point of view, Taiwan should be seen as not an adversarial relationship and should be as an ally. And as we see these tariff discussions continue, we hope that we see them making progress, but they come out with a good solution that continues to support the continued business between Taiwan and the U.S., continued investment of Taiwan into the U.S.
So just to be clear, the Chamber would like to see an end to the tariffs on Taiwanese products?
I think we want to see, we'd like to see that a reduction, obviously, and to a fair point where both sides can agree to continue to collaborate and invest in each other.
Also in the defense portion, as part of bolstering Taiwan's defense, the Chamber calls for Taiwanese companies to be integrated into the U.S. defense supply chain. So do you think that Taiwanese and U.S. businesses have a role to play in deterrence?
In terms of building materials, in terms of building services and products that build deterrence, absolutely. I think that Taiwan has proved for decades. Taiwan inside is the OEM side of things is there, and now that the U.S. is looking toward a non-red supply chain, I think Taiwan has a tremendous opportunity to facilitate that, to provide some of those goods, to make sure that fulfilling that goal of non-red and building more relationships and business between Taiwanese and American companies.
The white paper calls for more cabinet-level visits from U.S. officials to Taiwan. Is there any ceiling to the kinds of officials you'd like to see in Taiwan? Would the Chamber support, for example, a visit from the U.S. Secretary of State?
It's not up to us to decide. I think that the more higher-level visits that come, the better. Right? I think it shows a commitment to Taiwan, communication to Taiwan. And having those type of bilateral visits used to be a common thing, right? They stopped because of other issues, right? So we're just trying to restore them. We're not trying to change anything. Or from our opinion, we're not encouraging any change. We're just bringing it back to the norm.
With the new president at the helm, AmCham says it's focused on improving U.S.-Taiwan relations and making sure the voices of its member companies are heard. Brian Wu, IT, and Chris Gorin in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's chip-making giant TSMC has reported its May revenue of about $11 billion US. That's down 8.3% from April, but still up 40% compared to May of last year. Revenue for the first 5 months of this year is also up around 43% compared with the same period of 2024. The Taiwanese dollar is on the rise. Good news for shoppers, but a headache for local businesses. As the currency gains strength, some companies are feeling the squeeze. Aichi reports.
Enticed by favorable exchange rates and falling prices, Taiwanese tourists are eyeing trips to Japan to hit these Tokyo shopping streets, where they're finding their money goes a little further than usual.
日币有考虑，最近要去日本玩，会选时机再进场。
总比存在银行里面也不会变，利息也很少啊。那你干脆换，然后还可以就是出国。
But while the higher value of Taiwan's currency is a welcome bonus for holidaymakers, it's created some serious challenges for Taiwan's financial institutions and local industries. See, it's not just the yen that the Taiwanese dollar has appreciated against. In fact, it's a whole basket of currencies. And it's the rise against the US dollar especially that's causing headaches here in Taiwan. The life insurance industry invested heavily in the greenback in recent years, attracted by the higher interest rate, so higher returns of US assets. But insurers didn't do enough to protect themselves against sudden changes in the value of those assets, a process known as hedging. Authorities think this could lead to foreign exchange losses of up to $6.6 billion for local insurers.
所以1块钱的这样那个涨跌，就是差不多总体约略估计2000亿的影响数。
Taiwan's export-oriented economy is also feeling the impact of a stronger Taiwanese dollar.
这个28呢，我们这些是12年疫情过后所做的，都是全部被它吃回去了。我们都是那个利润都很低嘛，你稍微一影响到我们，就是没有办法。所以现在有很多这个中小型的，他们说的，我干脆就不做了。
As the Taiwanese dollar strengthens, local businesses earn less from customers buying their products in US dollars, while big companies can relatively easily absorb losses. Small enterprises, the kind that have long made up Taiwan's economy, see their profit margins eroded.
Additional headwinds like price competition from Japan and China, global supply chain restructuring, and the impact of US tariffs are all added up to a perfect storm that businesses are struggling to overcome. Analysts say the government needs to do more to support those businesses.
政府应该是有跨部会一个协助传统产业2次升级转型，从补助、租税优惠、辅导，从资金的一些挹注，协助传统产业渡过难关。要不然下半年到明年，传统产业会面临很大的一些，比如说无薪假，甚至有一些倒闭潮。
While the government has not launched specific measures to counter the rise in Taiwanese dollar, it has rolled out a package worth nearly $3 billion to support local industries and affected businesses. For now, Taiwanese businesses are keeping their eyes firmly on the exchange rate and doing their best to prepare for the unexpected. Alex Cheng, Ryan Wu, and IT for TaiwanPlus.
U.S. President Donald Trump is doubling the number of National Guard troops and sending 700 Marines to Los Angeles as protests against his crackdown on immigration escalate. AC Wells reports.
These protesters in Los Angeles are set to face another 2,000 National Guard troops and 700 Marines deployed by the Trump administration after protests broke out against immigration raids on Friday. The decision announced on X by U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth marks another escalation in President Donald Trump's response to protesters across the country who say their communities are being ripped apart.
I'm here with my friends, but I see a lot of strangers with very similar faces, very similar features to where we come from in Latin America. We're all indigenous, and it makes me tear up because I see all of them with so much life. They're fighting to keep their families together and to keep the community and the indigenous people together.
Trump's decision to federalize the National Guard and deploy active duty troops has been met with fierce criticism from California's Governor Gavin Newsom and from Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, who has called for an end to the immigration raids.
We need to stop the raids. This should not be happening in our city. It is not warranted, and the only thing it does is contribute to chaos. This was chaos that was started at Washington, D.C. On Thursday, the city was peaceful. On Friday, it was not because of the intervention of the federal government.
Newsom says he will be suing the Trump administration over the deployment of the National Guard. But Trump has defended his decision, blaming the governor for the unrest.
He's an incompetent governor. Look at the job he's doing in California. He's destroying one of our great states. And if I didn't get involved, if we didn't bring the Guard in, and we would bring more in if we needed it, because we have to make sure there's going to be law and order.
As protests entered the fourth straight day on Monday, rubber bullets and clashes continue to fill the streets of LA. And despite pleas from local officials, the deployment of even more troops means Trump is willing to escalate the confrontation above the heads of city and state authorities. Joseph Wu and Izzy Wells for TaiwanPlus.
3 decades ago, then Taiwan President Lee Teng-hui made a speech in the U.S. that would go on to spark a crisis in cross-strait relations. Cadence Quaranta looks back on that time.
Fellow alumni, ladies and gentlemen.
A simple opening to a speech that would have major consequences from Taiwan's then president, Lee Teng-hui. 30 years ago, that speech sparked tensions between the U.S. and China and a crisis in cross-strait relations.
It has been a long and challenging journey with many bumps in the road. Yet my wife and I are indeed very happy to return to this beloved campus.
In 1995, Lee was granted a visa for a supposedly private visit to Cornell University, his alma mater, becoming the first Taiwan president to ever visit the U.S. The trip broke long-standing diplomatic precedent, with no high-ranking Taiwan officials allowed into the U.S. for many years, after the U.S. had severed official diplomatic ties with Taiwan, switching recognition to China in 1979. Washington established its One China policy, recognizing the People's Republic of China as the sole legal Chinese government, and acknowledging the Chinese position that Taiwan is a part of China. Despite the visit being unofficial, in his speech, Lee said Taiwanese people were not happy with the country's international status, and also spoke about China, calling for a, quote, end to ideological confrontation. And China did not look kindly on the visit.
美国允许李登辉访美，对中美关系所产生的潜在的影响应该是很严重的。那么这些不利的因素会影响今后双边关系的发展。
Following the visit, China recalled its ambassador to the U.S., launched missiles near Taiwan, amassed troops on its southeastern coast, and conducted large-scale military exercises, beginning what is known as the Third Taiwan Strait Crisis. Amid the tensions, U.S. officials reaffirmed their commitment to the One China policy.
We acknowledge the Chinese position that there is but one China and that Taiwan is part of China. We reaffirm that we have no intention of advocating or supporting a policy of two Chinas or one China, one Taiwan.
But they also defended the decision to allow Lee's visit.
One of the basic tenets of this country is that we allow people the opportunity to speak. And that's what we did in this instance. I hope they'll recognize the importance of how deeply we believe in that right and that we can go on from here. The Chinese always ask us to consider their views in terms of cultural differences. We would hope they would consider ours.
While the crisis eventually de-escalated in 1996, it is still regarded as a notable moment in cross-strait relations. 3 decades on, tensions across the strait remain high, with no signs of improvement anytime soon. Scott Huang and Cadence Quaranta for TaiwanPlus.
Retired high-ranking military officials from Taiwan, the U.S., and Japan are taking part in a war game exercise simulating a Chinese invasion of Taiwan in 2030. Among the participants are retired Japanese Army Chief of Staff Iwasaki Shigeru and retired U.S. Navy Admiral and former chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Michael Mullen. The 2-day tabletop exercise begins Tuesday at National Zhengzhi University. Scenarios will test Taiwan's military response in 4 phases, from gray zone tactics to a full-scale assault, while assessing U.S. and Japanese support. Organizers say the goal is to draw real-world lessons for Taiwan's defense and for regional stability. Taiwan is reporting a spike in nearby Chinese military activity in the past day and a half, up to noon on Tuesday. Officials say they detected a total of 46 military aircraft in 2 separate incidents. Of these, 30 entered Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. This zone is not Taiwan's airspace, but serves as a defensive buffer. The military only provided a map for the first incursion of 14 planes. During the same period, authorities also spotted 6 naval vessels and 1 official ship operating nearby. In response, Taiwan's military put its own forces on standby. Taiwanese opera is getting a global twist. In a bold move to reach new audiences, one troupe is teaming up with a European director to reimagine classic Western plays. Once again, Cadence Quaranta reports and got a sneak peek at their final dress rehearsal.
A production that pushes the boundaries of what Taiwanese opera can be. The This opera, performed entirely in Taiwanese Daigi, is an adaptation of a 17th century French comedy, with parts of the story set in ancient China, a bold, cross-cultural take on a traditional art form.
怎么样去展现它的无限可能性，这样的一个雄心壮志是最重要的。
Taiwanese opera has been around for over a century. It was once the most watched art form in Taiwan, especially popular in the 1940s to the 1980s. But for years, its audience has been declining, with less interest among younger generations. It's for this reason that Yixin, a leading Taiwanese opera troupe founded over 35 years ago, has begun expanding beyond the stories and characters normally seen in traditional operas, trying new things to attract new audiences.
它其实它就是为了生存，它必须去符合现代时代的潮流。现在的观众想要看什么，他要根据那个潮流去做它一个改变，去做它的一个变革。
The troupe incorporated LGBTQ issues, adapted a novel, and in recent years has performed adaptations of 2 Western plays, working with German-born, France-based director Lucas Hemleb. This one, titled A Maze of Mirth and Mirage, is their second collaboration with Hemleb. It centers around a story of a father trying to find out about his runaway son, involving many twists, turns, and allusions. It was first performed last year in Taipei and is back this year for a 2-night run at the National Kaohsiung Center for the Arts in southern Taiwan. Hemleb says he's drawn to Taiwanese operas in part because they involve improvisation, similar to an early genre of Italian theater, and in part because of how much the art form values tradition, which he says is not always the case in Europe.
因为我们在欧洲有与传统一个特别的问题，因为我们很容易抛弃传统，因为这个传统是一个非常珍贵的，要保留的珍贵的事情，所以我觉得东方可以教我们一点一个另外的想法。
But at the same time, he says, tradition can evolve.
一边保留着传统，另一边发展一个特别的观念。台湾是比较年轻的国家，一个年轻的社会，所以他们有可能性。
A Maze of Mirth and Mirage retains many elements of traditional Taiwanese opera, like the language, singing, and movement styles, especially during fight scenes. While also incorporating more Western elements, among them the stage design.
我们这次要呈现的是一个比较奢华复杂的巴洛克式的风格，所以你可以看到我们的舞美设计呢，你可以感受到浓浓的巴洛克式的那个风格。
Actors were encouraged to think more about the complexity of their characters than they normally would for traditional Taiwanese operas.
像传统歌仔戏呢，它本来就有一些既定的一个表演模式，还有文化底蕴。那这一次卢卡斯导演用《欢愉迷宫》这一出戏跟我们合作的时候呢，在表演的方面呢，其实对于角色人物的复杂性还有立体面，让演员有更多的一个探讨。
Coming from different backgrounds, the first collaboration between Hemleb and the Yixin troupe was not without its challenges, like communication difficulties and language barriers. But eventually, they learned to work together. Hemleb directs in Mandarin, but doesn't speak much Taiwanese Daigi. So this time, to work effectively, he relied on memorizing the entire script. And after collaborating on 2 projects, they're already talking about the future. Hemleb says he'd like to work with Yixin again, this time on an adaptation of the work of French playwright Molière. And he also dreams of taking these performances abroad, to share Taiwanese opera in other parts of the world, a dream Sun shares.
我会很期待的就是说，当哪一天我在欧洲的这块土地上， 会听到我熟悉的七字调、都马调，我很熟悉的这些歌仔戏的曲牌，可是是在上演欧洲人耳熟能详的经典故事。这是一个多么有趣的一个交流跟结合啊！
Bold ideas like this, decades after the heyday of Taiwanese opera, are breathing new life into a traditional art form, which the Eastern Opera Troupe says is a necessary evolution amid changing audiences and changing times. Klein Wang, Peachy Zhuang, and Cadence Quaranta for TaiwanPlus.
And thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally, today we take you to Peru, where indigenous people are rebuilding the last surviving Inca bridge in an annual traditional event. I'm Liao. Take care and see you next time.
I'm Tiffany Wong in Kuala Lumpur, and you're watching Taiwan Plus.